Okay, we're back, and in this video we're going to create a database and insert some data. So we're moving along here. But before I do that, I just wanted to talk about how the basic structure of MongoDB works. It's important to understand that going forward. You just need to have a generic understanding. Now, MongoDB is not SQL. It's considered NoSQL. What does that mean? Well, it means it doesn't use tables to store data in the traditional sense. So, of course, a table in SQL has rows and columns. That is not the case in MongoDB. Again, it is NoSQL. It uses collections instead. That's what it uses. And as I said, traditional SQL has a table with rows and columns to store the data. Mongo uses collections to store the data. That's the key point. Collections, in turn, hold documents, which are BSON documents. This is similar to JSON. The JSON documents, very similar concept. Yeah, we'll talk more about that in future lectures. And then each document can contain one or more fields. And these fields consist of key value pairs. And that's where we can actually enter the data, whatever data we want to. So again, that's sort of the basic overall structure. It's not complicated. It's actually much easier to insert data and get going much quicker in MongoDB than traditional SQL. So it has quite a few advantages in that respect. So if we take a look over here on the right, I kind of created this little, I guess we would call it a diagram, but not really. But it's in a top down. So you just want to think of the database, the highest level. It holds collections. You must have at least one collection. If you do not create the collection, MongoDB will do that for you. Right below that, of course, is collections, which holds documents. We just talked about that. And the documents themselves contain the fields. And the fields are the key value pairs. This is where the actual data exists. So again, just keep this in mind. You have the database. The database needs collections. The collections holds the actual documents, which actually holds the fields. Okay, so let's get going over here, and it looks like I need to, I failed to load the shell. So let's go ahead and do that, Mongo sh. And one little trick, you can use the CLS command to clear everything. If you got a bunch of junk on the screen, you can get right back at the top. I use that quite a bit. Okay, so now let's go ahead and show our databases. And again, we'll create a database in a second. Okay, so we've got admin config local. We're in the test. So we're going to go ahead and switch. We're going to do use, and we're going to call this Ernie. How about that? You can call it whatever you want. Now switch to DB Ernie. Now, one thing you might be asking is, if I do a show DBS here, you're going to probably ask the question, why don't I see Ernie? What, didn't you just create that? Well, we haven't actually entered any data in there, so it doesn't physically exist on the hard drive. That's a very important point to make. But that's the nice thing about MongoDB. It allows us to go ahead and switch to it even though it doesn't exist. It will create it once we insert some data. Now, as I said, we need to actually now create our collection. Now, what we're going to do is actually create the collection on the fly. Now, there is a way just to simply create the collection, but why would you want to do that? Why not create the collection and then enter in the document and fields all at the same time? So that's what we're going to do. It really doesn't make a lot of sense to just enter in the collection unless you want a placeholder. And we'll do that in a future video, but really what you want to do is just create the collection on the fly. So the first thing we need to do is specify DB, and then you put in a dot. Now, here is where the collection name goes. In this case, we're going to call this driver underscore record. So I'm pretending that we're like storing IDs or something. Okay, driver license IDs or something. Okay, so we've got that. Now we're going to actually use the insert method. It has been deprecated. It used to be insert. Now it is insert one, because we're only going to do one document or one record. Kind of the same thing, think of it the same way, record, document. So we're going to need to put in open paren, and then the squiggly brackets, we need that next. And now here is where we actually enter in our field. And we're going to, what do we want to call this? Let's call it name. How about that? and we're going to call this Tom. Now we need to use quotes because this is a string. And there you go. It's just as simple as that. Now, realistically, you would enter several key value pairs here, but we're going to go ahead and enter one more in. So you put in a parenthesis, and let's go ahead and come up with a driver ID number. So we're just going to call this driver ID, and we're going to give this a numeric value of 91. There you go. Okay, that's simple. Pretty simple stuff, right? Okay, so now what we're going to do is close this, and we're going to, sorry, there we go. Okay, so we had to close it. All right, let's hit enter, and there you can see it is true. That means it worked. Now this insert ID here is something you could call later on with a method, or let's say you're coming in from a website, and we'll do this eventually where you need to pull this up from a website. This is sort of the ID that you might use. This object ID gets created. It can be used, right? It's a unique identifier, almost like a GUID. Think of it as a GUID. You can call this later on, perhaps from a website. You need to pull it up on a page. But you can see right there, it worked. It acknowledged true, and our data was entered. And what's kind of cool about this, if you notice, we can enter it in a string, and also we can put in numeric values as well. Pretty simple. Now, what if we wanted to go ahead and list this out? What's in our collection now? Pretty simple stuff. We're going to go db dot. We're going to call the collection again. Remember, we got to specify the collection name, which was records. That's what we created in the previous method. You just do a find, and you can just use parenthesis, open parenthesis, because we want to return everything. And there it did. It printed it out and found it, and there it is. So that, at a basic level, is how to create a database and a collection and put some data in it. You're moving along real quick. Let's go ahead and actually make sure our database is there. You can see now it's there. We've got some data. We've got 41 kilobytes. There is actually a way to drop the database. We're not going to drop this one because I want to keep it for future lectures, but you would actually do db drop database. Now, don't do this if you don't want to get rid of your database, but that's how you would do it. You don't even need to put any arguments in here. You would just hit enter, and it would drop it. I do recommend you back up your databases if you get a lot of data in here. We'll talk about that in future lectures, but there you go. So that's going to do it for this lecture. Hope you found it useful, and we will continue on in the next lecture with queries. Thanks.